Hi there. I'm Brian Tuskin, host of Cop to Corporate Life After Law Enforcement. This is a transition series, and I have a special guest, Brian Reich, who is a former law enforcement officer and now in the private sector. He's a big dog in the private sector, and I'll have him tell you a little about himself. Uh, so, Brian, you retired from law enforcement. Could you just give a short overview or biography of your law enforcement career and then the transition in the corporate world?
Sure, Brian. Well, thanks. First of all, thanks for having me. And I'm honored to be your first guest. So I did do 2 decades in law enforcement. I did a variety of things, everything from street cop, uniform cop, detective, and then I was a deputy chief in our county sheriff's office in the largest county in New Jersey, located right outside of New York City, the suburbs of New York City. So I did my career, and one of the things I learned when I was in law enforcement, because of a particular area of command I had, was I didn't know anything about security. So I'm a big believer in knowing what I don't know. And then I know one of your questions is going to be, what's the biggest pitfalls of cops, men and women coming out of the job, as we say in the Northeast, right? Law enforcement is knowing what they don't know. So I had this particular area of command when I was appointed as a deputy chief for physical security, access egress, multi-million-dollar camera upgrade in our county facilities. And I remember I went to the county and the folks that I was working for, and I said, well, I'm a sex crimes and a computer crimes detective by trade. What do I know about security? And they said, what would they say, Brian, as cops? Well, what's there to know? We're cops. We got capes and badges and we fly through the air and we know it, right? Well, no. So I got very involved in ASIS International, different industry organizations. To keyword that I look for in interviews and candidates, to learn what I don't know. And I didn't know what I didn't know. So I had to go out and find really smart people like yourself and many others in the industry to help mentor me to say, what the heck do I need to know about this security thing? And then I said, hey, this could be life after the badge. This could be a great gig and a rewarding second career. So that's kind of how I got started and into all this. And kind of one of the catalysts after a few years to have me start my transition advisors, helping others.
So, Brian, you bring up a great point about law enforcement, cops, or just the general tone of the industry, where we know a lot. We're in the know, and we just don't feel comfortable not knowing stuff, right? So if you're doing physical security, and when people think of physical security, you think of the mall cop, right? And it's so much bigger than that in the private sector. And there's many rewarding careers out in the private sector. So tell me your transition into the private sector. What industry do you work in? And I understand you're a high-level executive in security. And so walk me through what that means. Where are you located? And as a hiring manager, when you hire for the corporate security world, the global security world, tell me why former law enforcement professionals make great candidates, but also why do some of them struggle?
Yeah, so there's a whole bunch in there. So unpack that a little bit to coin a private sector term. First of all, I had to learn all those terms around the boardrooms in the corporate sector. Let's unpack that and circle back and follow up. And real quick story before we go into that, Brian, I think it's a real funny anecdote. I was working with a guy right out of DEA, hardcore, straight up narcotics guy for 20 something years out of New Jersey. And everybody kept saying COB. This is due, COB. So it's my first 3 weeks out of law enforcement. And I looked over him. His first name is Tom. And I said, Tom, what the heck is COB? Everything is due, COB. He goes, I don't know, bro. I was going to ask you, COB. So we finally went to this career civilian who worked in this financial services firm we were in, my first gig. And we said, hey, man, what's COB mean? They looked at us like we had two heads. They go, close a business. What? We don't close. So we didn't know that for two decades, COB. So a lot of different kinds of learning curves. So when I got out, I started with a financial services firm right out of the gate. I had a blessed law enforcement career, did a lot of cool things, learned about technology, which I think really helped me. I recognized quick that when I had an opportunity to go into computer crimes, that the ones and zeros are really, really important. And even though the guys in narcotics and gangs and all the sexy units made fun of us because they saw the computer crimes guys putting on their jeans and tack vests. Ooh, the computer crime guys are going to go hit a door today. Be careful. I learned quick that, well, they don't, even though homicide work, narcotics work, very, very important work. It's all God's work. And thank God we have such brave men and women that do it. There's not a lot of ways to leverage that in the private sector if that's all you know. There's a lot of things you could take from that. So I said, hey, computer crimes, I loved it. It was challenging. But I said, I think there's a lot I could do with this life after the badge. So I started thinking about life after the badge years before I had to get into it. So my first gig was doing some basic investigations for a big global financial firm, fraud, due diligence, suitability reviews, financial products, way below the level and the cost that, the salary that I wanted to be at. But I said, it's just a great way for me to show the world, hey, I can assimilate. I could work in a corporate culture. I could speak to the person in HR. I could do this. Let me show them I could do that. I don't care about the salary right now. I have a pension. That'll come later. So kind of that take 2 steps back to go 3 steps forward type of mentality. And then quickly, within 7 or 8 months, because of networking and a lot of professional associations, big believer in networking, I bumped into a guy at the time, I don't know if we're using names of companies, but at the time it was the second largest cable internet service provider in the country. And he said, his name was Brian also. There's a lot of us running around. And he said, hey, what are you doing? I told him, he says, what do you know about the internet? So I mentioned a couple of words, network address translation, natting, talked about IPv6 and all this crazy stuff that makes people's heads spin. And he's like, I got to talk to you. I need a guy that's a cop who could speak cop, but also knows a little bit about technology. And then I got my first gig as director of security for the Northeastern US for a large cable internet service provider. Was there 4.5 years. We built that program from the ground up, learned a tremendous amount. So that was my first gig.
So Brian, you brought up another great point about speaking cop. I've noticed working for a large global company that no matter where you're at in the world, law enforcement, they're pretty much the same. They're die from the same cast from the same die, and they are speak the same. They have the same sense of humor. Yeah. And so I always call it that secret handshake, right? So you're working in corporate, you have to get to say there's an investigation or you need to talk to a detective or special agent. By you having that vernacular, the cop speak, you could use it to your advantage because they're like, all right, this guy Brian, he's former LEO, he knows what he's doing. I'll take the call. So could you explain? It's a double-edged sword. You could be great at cop speak, but you get back into the corporate world where you don't know the vernacular of the corporate world, and so it's like speaking 2 different languages. So could you just talk about transitioning successfully, so where you're not just taking your persona from law enforcement and just putting it within your private sector, but merging and melding it?
Yeah, Brian, that's a really good point. So, I mean, obviously, depending on what you're going to do in the private sector and the levels you're at, those become more and more important. So I would say the cop speak is really important, or the ability really to leverage your relationships, your knowledge of how the system works is really important, especially for investigations and intelligence collection and things of that nature. But then when we get inside the boardroom, so to speak, and we're dealing with the corporate folks, I think understanding what the expectations are and be able to wade through all that shades of gray. You know, where we come from, it's pretty black and white. You break the law, you get arrested, you take a test, maybe you get promoted. Assignments can be a little in gray. You know, hey, I want this unit. Why does he has that unit and I wanted that unit? But it's pretty hierarchical. Well, I'm on 18 years. I should be his supervisor or her supervisor. And she's only on 11 years. So I think navigating in those waters, dealing with HR. So take investigations, for example. You know, we're really used to controlling our interviews and our investigations. And you do an investigation. I remember when I first got in, to highlight your point, the first company I was at, we had this pretty big investigation where it was tens of thousands of dollars worth of fraud. And we were in a very heavy union environment. And the individual, the subject of the investigation, was very influential and could, with the picking up the phone, slow down business to the tunes of millions of dollars because of his particular role in this very large union in the Northeast. And this individual is being investigated for tens of thousands of dollars of fraud. Very common type of fraud, T&E fraud, travel and expense fraud, right? Dinners with the wife, with the kids, all kinds of stuff. We had video, we had all kinds of proof. And the company decided to, rather than terminate him, to take his credit card away, remove his parking spots, and basically give him a big slap on the wrist. Dealing with my team, a lot of ex-law enforcement, amazing investigators, they were really, really upset. This guy should get locked up. This is BS. And it was really frustrating. And I really had to get them to understand it's really about those shades of gray and what's in the best interest of the business. Yes, there is right and wrong. There's ethical and non-ethical. So they satisfied their ethical obligations to the shareholders by doing a due diligence investigation, by stopping the fraud so that the shareholders' money wouldn't be wasted. But then how they executed on that is what's better for the business. Terminating this person and having millions of dollars of fraud, well, that's not good for the shareholders. We're doing some happy medium where this individual's happy that they got a break, but they're still paying some consequences. So those kinds of things in navigating, I think, can be difficult for law enforcement coming fresh out to kind of understand and work through.
And I'm glad you brought that up because I have experience. I spent 20 years in the private sector and early on as a new leader in the corporate security, global security world. I had recruited a seasoned detective. She had 10 years in the force. And the one thing she had a really hard time coming to grips with, as you mentioned, as being a law enforcement officer, is if the victim, who's ultimately the company, decides we just prefer to either terminate this person with cause because of they violated an internal policy. But even though the behavior was criminal, so say they committed some sort of travel and expense fraud or they stole some stuff, but the decision as the victim, as a company, they could just say, we don't want to pursue criminally. We just want to close out the case and move forward. This former detective just could not handle that, right? There's so this is advice for our followers out there that are trying to get advice, that you are no longer a cop once you go into the private sector, right? You now work for that corporation and you have to look out what's best for the corporation, the shareholders. And so I'm really glad you brought up that point. And it's for some, it's really hard. So before you pull the plug out there, if you want to retire and take a private sector job, just note you're no longer a cop.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And really being able to partner with people irrespective of your perception of their tenure. As you know, Brian, the relationships in these corporations, there's some politics, there's perception issues. And there's also that expectation that you're just going to be a good partner, irrespective of title. And throwing that gauntlet down, I remember, and I think a lot of guys and gals that work uniform could understand, when you block a highway or something, you have those barriers up. Inevitably, somebody comes up to you and says, "Hey, but I have to go there." And how many people have said, well, you can't. Well, why? Because I got these, right? Or I got this. And that doesn't really work in the corporations. We can't just throw the gauntlet down. No one's standing up in the room when I walk in because I'm the director of security. Nobody really cares. And it could be a 3-year, right out of college HR specialist. I got slippers older than 3 years, right? But it doesn't matter. In that particular project, he or she may be my partner. And we need to be able to work as peers and lead through influence, rather than lead through our title and our authority. And I think that is also a paradigm shift, depending on the agency you came from, I think.
So another great point, and I saw in the comments in my first video blog, somebody mentioned about the soft skills, and soft skills are so important. We in law enforcement, especially the ones on the street and in patrol, whether it's called verbal judo or you understand how to de-escalate a situation, the same skills apply in the corporate world. And so I'm glad you brought that up. But some police officers, they are so used to getting their way, right? If you don't follow the law, you get a ticket or you get arrested. In the corporate world, you can work with way less experienced people, but they could be a peer, a partner. So having those soft skills, could you give some examples of how you've honed the soft skills or how you coach people transitioning into the private sector? What can help them get that muscle?
Yeah. So it's time. Got to be patient. I've honed it because I've made some mistakes. And I think we learn more from our failures than we do our successes. So I think being okay with that is good. I think listening, patience, having a kind of a delay, how you could set your email to, if you send it, you could delay when it goes out. So if you want to take it back, you can, but setting that in here. So when you're at a meeting, when we have an initial reaction, stop and think, how am I going to react? Am I coming across like law enforcement? How am I being perceived? And I think that's really important, getting that feedback. I will tell you, when I'm with my senior leaders that work for me, almost every meeting, every interaction we have of any substance, I'll say to my one or two top guys who I have a tremendous amount of respect for, hey, how did that meeting go? How do you think we were perceived? How was I perceived? Especially if I'm dressing my team, and getting that feedback and doing that over the years has really helped me say, oh gosh, really? Did I come across like that? Okay, let me work on that. Because I know I'm doing this about a decade, but I did something else, I was a 911 operator. I was an EMT. I was a cop for 20 years. I mean, I did that stuff longer, than I'm doing this. So I want to make sure, knowing what I don't know, I'm constantly getting that feedback. And to this day, just yesterday, I said to one of the guys that works, I always say one of the guys that I support. Yeah, does he report to me? But when I'll say, hey, this is so-and-so, I support him. So one of the guys on my team that I support, I said, how did that go? How do you think I was perceived? How was the message? Because I want to be hyper vigilant of that perception. So I think getting that feedback is a great way to understand it. Because if I just listen, it may not be evident to me how I came across. And I think that's so important coming out of where we come from.
I have had the same issue early on in my career, and people would give me feedback because I was a little, I would say, tenacious and aggressive when I started off as an investigator, and I had great coaches and mentors from the corporate side. So I would recommend that for our listeners here contemplating on transitioning. Have a coach, have a mentor, and then seek that feedback. I think there's a book called Feedback is a Gift, and it is a gift. if it makes you feel uncomfortable when you hear that feedback, then it's likely hitting a nerve, right? Because there could be some truth behind it, and you should be open. You should have an open mindset to accept that feedback. And then what you just explained, Brian, you asked about how did I come across? So you sought feedback, you got the feedback, and then you asked for more feedback. How am I doing? So kudos for you for doing that. And those soft skills are just paramount importance to be successful in the private sector. So as we kind of wrap up, because I promised my listeners here for Cop to Corporate that we're going to be concise, succinct, to the point. The whole goal here is to help you out there to plan and prepare for life after law enforcement, or life after the badge, as Brian coins it. And we want to give you all the tools and resourcing to be successful out there. And I'm building a more, I would say, comprehensive website that will have tips and tricks and videos, all free for LE out there to get. But I want to touch also on Brian. You do a transition consulting. Could you just talk a little about that? Because there are some officers that I spoke to from federal government, from military, from state and local, that want more. They want help in resume writing. They want help in LinkedIn updates and all that kind of stuff. And I'm unable to help anyone, but I understand that you kind of dabble in a consulting role. So tell me a little about that.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. So it's My Transition Advisors, and we're kind of a one-stop for folks that really want that comprehensive help. Resumes, LinkedIn profile, cover letters, and then we'll do coaching, how to negotiate salary, all that kind of stuff. But you got to have the documents first. And one of the things that I found out in the world is there's a lot of resume writers, a lot of folks that do LinkedIn, but they don't understand where we come from and what we do. So I act as that translator between the writers that I have, on retainer with My Transition Advisors, and the men and women coming out of law enforcement from various levels, and the intelligence community. And we act as that translator and really help them create the documents and the profile and their brand in the best possible way for them to achieve their goals. And I find it really rewarding, and we just love doing it.
Well, Brian, I really appreciate you taking the time to share your experiences from transitioning from law enforcement to the private sector. I hope our followers out there have got some insight from this that can help you make that decision. And until the next time we catch up, you have a great holiday season that's coming up. And thank you.
Take care, everybody.